I need to say this clearly before anything else. I am not a whistleblower. I am not filing a complaint. I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble, and I'm not trying to get myself reassigned. I understand how this document will be received, and I understand that the Systems Reconciliation Division has a process for flagging anomalous data entries, and that process does not include personal testimony from a GS-11 hydrological data engineer who's been with the Corps for 9 years and has never, in those 9 years, filed a single deviation report. I am filing one now. My name is Renata Vasquez. I work out of the Huntington District Office of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Water Management Section. My job in the plainest possible terms is to make sure our data is real. I reconcile readings from active gauging stations against their registered metadata, location, hardware type, calibration date, transmission protocol, operator assignment. When a station is decommissioned, I verify that its data stream has terminated and that its historical archive has been indexed and closed. When a station is commissioned, I verify that its data stream has initialized and that its metadata profile matches the physical installation report. It is not complicated work. It is not glamorous, but it requires precision, and I am precise. I have closed over 400 station reconciliations in my career without a single audit flag. My supervisor, Dale Hendricks, once told me during a performance review that I was the only person in the section who had never generated a rounding discrepancy. He said it like it was a joke. It wasn't a joke to me. I need that context established because what I am about to describe will sound like I've lost that precision. I haven't. The data I'm going to walk through is clean. I've verified it 7 times. The problem is not the data's quality. The problem is its existence. On February 11th, I was performing a routine quarterly sweep of legacy station archives in the Ohio River Basin database. Orbis, the system we've used since 1994 to aggregate hydrological data from approximately 2,000 active and inactive gauging stations across the basin watershed. My task that day was unremarkable. I was reconciling a batch of 1980s-era station closures in eastern Kentucky, confirming that decommissioned stations showed terminated data streams and properly archived final readings. Station 0471-KY-licking-09 was the 14th entry in my batch. The station's metadata profile told a simple story. It was a Type 2 mechanical float gauge installed in 1961 on the South Fork of the Licking River, approximately 4 miles upstream of the Morgan-Rowan County line. It monitored river stage, water surface elevation, and transmitted daily readings via a dedicated phone line to the district office. It was operated and maintained by a single assigned technician, as was standard for remote stations of that era. The station was physically destroyed in the April 1977 flood event, the same storm system that killed 22 people in eastern Kentucky and caused an estimated $400 million in damage across the region. The station's destruction was logged on April 6, 1977. Its data stream was officially terminated on April 19, 1977, following a 2-week confirmation period. Its final archived reading was a stage height of 31.7 feet, recorded at 2:14 a.m. on April 4, 1977, approximately 9 hours before the floodwaters overtopped the gauge housing. The station's assigned technician was a man named Harlan Collett. His personnel file, which I accessed through the Legacy Human Resources Archive, showed that he was hired in 1963 at the age of 24, assigned to Station 0471 as his sole responsibility, and declared dead on April 5th, 1977. His body was recovered 11 miles downstream on April 9th. He was 38 years old. There is a photograph in his file. A young man in a collared shirt standing next to a metal housing that looks like an oversized mailbox on stilts. He's squinting. The river behind him is calm and brown and unremarkable. None of that is the anomaly. That is all consistent, all documented, all verified across multiple independent sources. The anomaly is that Station 0471-KY-Licking-09 is still transmitting. I found it during the reconciliation sweep. The station's archive status was flagged as closed in the master index, which is correct. But when I opened the detailed data ledger, the subtable where individual readings are stored, the final entry was not from April 4th, 1977. The final entry was from February 10th, 2026. Yesterday. I want to be extremely specific about what I saw because I know how this sounds. The data ledger for Station 0471 contained continuous daily readings from April 4th, 1977 through February 10th, 2026. That is 17,845 consecutive daily entries. Each entry contained a timestamp, a stage height reading in feet, and a data quality flag. Every single quality flag was marked V, verified. Every single reading was formatted correctly. There were no gaps. There were no duplicates. There were no formatting errors. 17,845 days of perfect data from a station that was destroyed 49 years ago. My first assumption was a database error, a mirroring glitch, a duplicate key, some legacy system artifact copying data from another station into 0471's ledger. This happens. Not often, but it happens, and it's exactly the kind of thing my job exists to catch. I pulled the readings from the two nearest active stations, 0468-KY-Licking-06 and 0474-KY- Licking-12, both upstream and downstream of 0471's former location, and ran a comparison. The readings from 0471 were not copies. They were not mirrors. Yet they were independent values that showed consistent, physically plausible variation from the neighboring stations. The stage heights at 0471 were on average 1.3 feet higher than 0468 and 0.8 feet lower than 0474, which is exactly what you would expect from a station positioned between them on that stretch of river, given the channel gradient and the tributary inputs in that segment. I want to say that again because it matters. The data was not just present, it was correct. It described real river conditions with the kind of locational specificity that you can only get from an instrument that is actually measuring water at that exact point. I spent the rest of that day running diagnostics. I checked the transmission log. Orbis records the pathway of every incoming data packet, the originating hardware ID, the transmission protocol, are near the relay nodes. Station 0471's readings were arriving via a protocol designation I didn't recognize, POTS-7, which I eventually identified through a technical manual from 1974 that I had to request from the Huntington District Archive as a dedicated copper pair phone line transmission format that the Corps stopped supporting in 1991. The hardware ID matched 0471's original installation record. The relay node was listed as HQ-Huntington-Legacy-04, which corresponds to a decommissioned analog receiving terminal that was physically removed from this building in 1996. The data was arriving through infrastructure that no longer exists, from a station that no longer exists, via a protocol that is no longer supported, and being deposited into a database that should not be able to accept it. I told Dale the next morning. I showed him the ledger. I showed him the comparison analysis. I showed him the transmission log. He looked at it for about 15 minutes, asked me if I'd checked for a duplicate key error. I had. Asked me if I'd contacted IT. I hadn't yet, and told me to submit a data integrity ticket and move on to the next batch. I submitted the ticket. I did not move on. That evening at home, I accessed Orbis through the remote portal and opened station 0471's ledger again. There was a new entry, February 11th, 2026. Today's reading. Stage height, 8.2 feet. Quality flag, V. I checked 0468 and 0474. Their readings for the day were 6.9 and 9.1 feet, respectively. Station 0471's reading fit perfectly between them. Physically perfect, hydrologically perfect. I did something I probably shouldn't have, and I pulled the full 49-year data set and loaded it into my personal analysis software, a program I use for side projects, not connected to the core network. I plotted the entire record. Every flood event, every drought, every seasonal pattern for nearly 5 decades, rendered as a continuous curve. It was beautiful. I don't mean that figuratively. It was one of the cleanest hydrological records I have ever seen. The seasonal cycles were textbook. The flood peaks aligned precisely with known storm events. I checked 11 of them against USGS flood records and NOAA precipitation data. Every single one matched. The base flow recession curves were smooth and physically consistent. There was no noise, no drift, no instrument degradation signal. In 49 years of continuous operation, the gauge had never needed recalibration. And that's not possible. Even the best maintained modern digital sensors require recalibration every 18 to 24 months. A mechanical float gauge from 1961 would need it more often. And this gauge was destroyed. It was physically broken apart by a flood that moved houses off their foundations. The concrete pad it sat on was found 300 yards downstream, cracked in half. I need to describe what happened when I went to the site. But first, I need to explain something about the river. The South Fork of the Licking River, in the stretch where Station 0471 was located, was rerouted in 1986 as part of a flood mitigation project. The original channel, the one the station monitored, was dammed at both ends and allowed to dry. It's still there on topographic maps if you know what to look at. A shallow, eerie curving depression running through what is now a hayfield owned by a family named Prater. The river itself was redirected into a straighter, deeper channel approximately 200 yards to the east. Station 0471's coordinates place it in the middle of a dry field. There is no water there. There has been no water there for 40 years. The river the gauge was built to measure does not exist at that location anymore. And yet the gauge is reading water, rising water. I drove out on February 15th. It's about a 90-minute drive from Huntington into Morgan County. I didn't tell Dale, I didn't tell anyone. I took a core vehicle because the access road is unpaved and my personal car wouldn't make it. And I signed the vehicle out under a general site inspection code that doesn't require supervisor pre-approval. The Protter property is at the end of a gravel road that turns to dirt about a mile before the gate. There's no cell service. The field is wide and flat and brown. Winter hay stubble, frozen mud, a tree line on the far ridge. I parked at the gate and walked in. I had the coordinates on my GPS unit. I found the location. It's unremarkable. A flat patch of frozen ground in the middle of a field. If you look carefully, you can see the faintest depression where the old river channel used to run. A shallow, wide curve in the terrain, maybe 8 inches lower than the surrounding field, filled with dead grass. There is no water. There is no station. There is no concrete pad. There is nothing. I stood there for a while. I don't know exactly how long. The air was cold and still. I could hear a dog barking somewhere far off, and the occasional sound of a truck on the county road. I took photographs. I took GPS readings. I confirmed the coordinates 3 times. Then I checked Orbis on my phone. No cell service. But I'd loaded the most recent reading before I left. February 15th, 2026. Stage height, 8.7 feet. Quality flag, V. I was standing in a dry field and the data said I was standing in 8.7 feet of water. I want to stop here and address something directly. I know what this sounds like. I know the easy explanations. Database corruption, spoofed data injection, some elaborate prank by someone with access to legacy system architecture. I have considered all of these. I have tested for all of these. The data injection theory fails because Orbis's legacy input channels are read-only. They were sealed when the analog infrastructure was decommissioned, and reopening them would require physical access to hardware that no longer exists in this building or anywhere else. The corruption theory fails because corrupted data doesn't maintain 49 years of hydrological consistency with independently verified real-world conditions. The prank theory fails because no one would sustain a 49-year prank that no one was supposed to find, written in a data format that 3 people on Earth still understand. Something is generating this data. Something at those coordinates, or something that behaves as though it is at those coordinates, is measuring a river that isn't there and reporting the measurements through a system that can't receive them into a database that can't accept them. And it has been doing this without interruption since the day Harlan Collett died. I need to talk about Harlan Collett now. His personnel file is thin. Hired 1963, assigned Station 0471. In annual performance reviews through 1976, it's all satisfactory. No disciplinary actions, no commendations, no transfers, no complaints. He lived in a rented house in the town of Cannell City, about 6 miles from the station. He was unmarried. His emergency contact was listed as his mother, Edith Collett, in Frenchburg. The 1977 flood killed him. His body was recovered downstream. The cause of death on his file is listed as drowning. The recovery report notes that he was found wearing his Corps-issued field jacket and boots, which suggests he was at or near the station when the water rose. The report also notes, and I've read this sentence more times than I can count, that the decedent's hands showed post-mortem injuries consistent with prolonged gripping of a fixed object. He held on to something. As the water took him, he held on. I don't know why that detail stayed with me the way it did. I've read hundreds of personnel files. I've processed dozens of station closures associated with fatalities, floods, equipment failures, vehicle accidents on remote access roads. Death is part of the infrastructure record. It's not something I look away from, but it's also not something that usually follows me home. Harlan Collette followed me home. I accessed the Legacy HR archive again and requested his full personnel packet. Not just the summary file, but the original paper documents that were scanned into the system in 2003. Most of them were unremarkable. Hiring paperwork, tax forms, a physical examination report from 1963 showing him in good health. But at the back of the packet, filed under miscellaneous correspondence, there were 14 letters. They were handwritten, and they were addressed to the District Engineer, Huntington District, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They were dated between March 1970 and January 1977. They were all from Harlan Collette, and they all said with minor variations the same thing. He was requesting a backup gauge. The letters were polite, formal, and increasingly detailed. In the first one, dated March 14, 1970, he simply noted that Station 0471 was the sole monitoring point on a 7-mile stretch of river with significant flood history, and that a backup gauge positioned upstream would provide valuable redundancy. By the 6th letter, dated August 1973, he had included hand-drawn diagrams of proposed backup locations, estimated installation costs, and a list of flood events in which earlier warning from an upstream gauge would have provided additional evacuation time for the communities of Cannell City and Redbird Hollow. By the 12th letter, dated June 1976, his tone had shifted. He was no longer making a technical argument. He wrote, and I'm quoting this exactly because I have read it enough times to have it memorized. I am asking you to understand that I am one man and this is one gauge, and the river does not care about either. When the water comes, and it will come, the only thing between the people downstream and no warning at all is whether I am awake and whether the gauge is working. I am always awake, but I am asking for a second gauge because I will not always be here, and the river will not stop. There is no record of any response to any of the 14 letters. The last letter is dated January 3rd, 1977, 3 months before the flood. It is 4 sentences long. It says, I am writing again about the backup gauge for Station 0471. I understand that this request has been declined or deferred 13 times. I will continue to maintain the station to the best of my ability. I want it on record that I asked. I want it on record that I asked. I sat in my apartment in Huntington and read that sentence, and something shifted in me that I don't fully understand, and I'm not going to try to explain in a formal deviation report. But I will say this. After I read Harlan Collette's letters, the data in Station 0471's ledger stopped looking like an anomaly and started looking like a continuation. He asked for redundancy. He asked for a system that would outlast him. He was denied, and then he died in the flood he had spent 7 years warning about, holding on to something fixed as the water carried him away. And the gauge kept transmitting. I went back to the data. I want to describe what I found when I looked more closely at the data headers, the metadata fields that accompany each reading. Modern Orbis entries have streamlined headers: station ID, timestamp, reading, quality flag. But legacy entries from the pre-digital era have additional fields that were carried over during the 1994 system migration. Most of these fields are blank or contain default values. One of them is labeled OPR-ID, operator identification. In active stations, this field contains the personnel code of the technician who verified the reading. In Station 0471's 49 years of posthumous data, every single entry carries the same OPR ID, HC-0471-63. Harlan Collett, assigned 1963, operating continuously. I know this is a data field. I know it could be a default value carried forward by a system that doesn't know the operator is dead. I know that. But I also know that OPR-ID is not an auto-populated field. In the legacy system, it required manual input. Someone, or something, has been entering Harlan Collett's operator code into every reading every single day for 49 years. I need to describe what happened on February 19th. I was at home. It was late, after 11. I had the Orbis portal open. I'd been watching the daily readings update in something that I can only describe as a vigil, though I don't know what I was keeping vigil for. The reading for February 19th appeared at 2:14 a.m., which is the same time to the minute as the final pre-flood reading on April 4th, 1977. Every reading in the 49-year posthumous record, I realized, has been time-stamped at 2:14 a.m. Every single one. 17,845 entries, all at the exact moment the last real reading was taken before the water rose. But on February 19th, there was a second reading. It appeared at 2:15 a.m., 1 minute later. The stage height was 8.9 feet, and in the OPR-ID field, instead of HC-0471-63, there was a different code, RV-HQ-17. That's my code. Renata Vasquez, Huntington District Headquarters, employee number 17 in the current Water Management Section roster. I have never entered data into Station 0471. I have never entered data into any station. My job is reconciliation, not data collection. Where I don't have input access to legacy data channels. I don't even have the software permissions to write to those fields. But there it was. My operator code in a data stream that arrives through decommissioned copper phone lines to a receiving terminal that was removed from this building 30 years ago. I didn't sleep that night. I went into the office early and before 6 and pulled the full transmission log for the 2:15 entry. The log showed the same impossible pathway. POTS7 protocol, legacy relay node, HQ-Huntington-Legacy-04, hardware origin ID matching Station 0471's destroyed gauge. But there was one difference. The transmission log for every previous entry listed the signal origin coordinates as the station's registered location, the dry field in Morgan County. The February 19th entry, the one with my code, enlisted a different origin. The coordinates were for the Huntington District office. This building. Specifically, and I verified this 3 times with the GPS reference grid, the coordinates corresponded to the 2nd floor east wing. Room 214. My office. The reading came from my office. I need to be clear about something. I did not generate this reading. I was at home. The office was empty, but the building's security log confirms that no one entered after 6 p.m. on the 18th and before 5:47 a.m. on the 19th, which is when I badged in. There was no one in room 214. There was no equipment in room 214 capable of generating a legacy POTS-7 transmission. There are no copper phone lines in this building anymore. They were pulled out during the 2008 renovation, but the system recorded a reading from my office, tagged with my operator code at 2:15 a.m. on February 19th. Stage height, 8.9 feet. I measured the ceiling height of room 214 the next morning. It is 9.4 feet. The water that doesn't exist, in a river that was rerouted 40 years ago, measured by a gauge that was destroyed 49 years ago, reported by a dead man who held on until the current took him. The water was 6 inches below my ceiling. I pulled the trend analysis on February 20th. I should have done it earlier, but I think some part of me didn't want to see the shape. The stage height readings at station 0471 have been rising. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would trigger any automated alert, even if the station were active and monitored. The rise is slow. Seasonal variation still dominates the signal. But underneath the seasons, underneath the floods and the droughts and the base flow recessions, there is a trend, a linear, consistent, patient increase in baseline water level, averaging 0.04 feet per year. In 1977, the baseline was approximately 6.2 feet. In 2026, it is approximately 8.9 feet. I extrapolated the trend line. If the rate of rise holds, and in 49 years it has not deviated, the stage height at station 0471 will reach 9.4 feet in approximately 12 and a half years. 9.4 feet, the height of my ceiling. I don't know what that means. I need to say that. I don't know what it means for a phantom river to reach the ceiling height of a room 63 miles from the channel it no longer occupies. I don't know what it means for a dead man's gauge to tag me as its operator. I don't know what it means for water that doesn't exist to rise at a rate so slow and so steady that it suggests not a flood but a filling. Something patient. Something that has been climbing for half a century toward a level it intends to reach. But I know what Harlan Collette knew in January 1977, 3 months before the water took him. I know what it feels like to see something coming and to write it down and to send it to the only system that exists for receiving it, knowing that the system was not built to hear what you are saying. I want it on record that I asked. On February 21st, I attempted to delete the February 19th entry, the one with my operator code. I submitted a data correction request through the standard Orbis maintenance channel. The request was processed. The system returned a confirmation. Entry deleted. I refreshed the ledger. The entry was still there. My code, my coordinates, 8.9 feet. I submitted the deletion request again. Confirmation received. Entry still present. I submitted it 4 more times. Each time the system confirmed successful deletion. Each time the entry remained. On the 6th attempt, the system returned a message I had never seen before in 9 years of working with Orbis. It said, "Correction denied, entry verified by station operator." I called the IT infrastructure team. I told them I had a legacy data entry that couldn't be deleted. They asked for the station ID. I gave it. There was a long pause. The technician, a man named Paul, I've worked with him before, told me that station 0471 was flagged in their system as active, do not modify. I asked him when that flag was set. He checked. He was quiet for a while. Then he said the flag was set on April 5th, 1977, the day Harlan Collett died. Someone on the day the station was destroyed and its operator was killed set a system flag that protected the station's data from modification. And in 49 years, no one had looked at it, no one had queried it, no one had reconciled it. It had been generating continuous daily readings, tagged with a dead man's operator code, protected by a flag, set the day he drowned, and it had been sitting in the database, waiting for someone precise enough and thorough enough to open the ledger and see. Dale told me on February 22nd that IT had reviewed my data integrity ticket and classified it as a legacy system artifact, requiring no further action. He told me, and I could see that he was uncomfortable, that he had been told to deliver this message and wanted it over quickly, that the recommended resolution was to manually close the station's data stream, archive the anomalous entries as system-generated test data, and update the master index to reflect the closure. As he told me the station would be formally re-decommissioned on March 1st. I asked him what would happen to the data. He said it would be archived. I asked if archived meant preserved. He said it meant moved to inactive storage. I asked if inactive storage was accessible. He said it was technically, but that no one ever accessed it. I asked him if he understood that the data was accurate, that I had verified it against independent sources, that it represented a genuine hydrological record of real-world conditions, that deleting it would destroy 49 years of irreplaceable environmental monitoring data. He said, "Renata, it's a dead station." I didn't argue. There was nothing to argue with. He was right in every way that the system understands rightness. The station is dead. The operator is dead. The river at that location is dead. The infrastructure that carries the data is dead. Everything about Station 0471 is dead except the data itself, which is alive, which has been alive every single day for 49 years, which knows the river better than any living instrument in the basin, because it has never stopped listening. I have 9 days before they close the stream. Here is what I have done. I have downloaded the complete dataset, all 17,845 entries plus the February 19th anomaly, to a personal drive. I have printed the full dataset on paper. It is 1,247 pages. I have printed Harlan Collett's 14 letters. I have printed the transmission logs, the comparison analyses, the trend extrapolation, the metadata headers with his operator code. I have put all of it in a binder. The binder is in my apartment. I have also started a second file, and this one is not about Station 0471. This one is about me. On February 22nd, after the meeting with Dale, I went home and opened Orbis. The daily reading was there. 2:14 a.m. stage height, 8.9 feet. OPR-ID HC-0471-63. Normal, if anything about this can be called normal. But below it, at 2:15, there was another entry with my code, same as before. Origin coordinates room 214, stage height 9.0 feet. It had risen 1/10 of a foot in my office. On February 23rd, 9.0 feet. On February 24th, 9.1 feet. The readings at station 0471's original location are holding steady at their seasonal baseline. The rise is only happening at the second origin point, my office. The water, whatever the data is describing, is rising only where I am. I said, I don't know what this means. That's still true, but I know what the data says. And I know that Harlan Collette spent 7 years writing letters to a system that wouldn't listen, and that when the water came, he held on to something fixed, and that his gauge never stopped recording, and that he waited 49 years, patient as a river, until someone opened the ledger and paid attention. And now the data has my name on it. I am going to say something that does not belong in a deviation report, and I don't care. I think Harlan Collett found his backup gauge. I think he has been building it entry by entry, day by day, in the only medium available to him. Data, clean data, perfect data. Data so faithful and so precise that it would be undeniable to anyone who did the work of actually looking at it. And I think the reason the water is rising in my office is not because there is a flood coming, and I think it's because there has always been a flood coming. The same flood. The one he warned about 14 times and died in and never stopped measuring. I think the water is the warning. And I think it rises toward whoever is reading, because reading is the only thing that ever mattered, the only thing he ever asked for. Someone on the other end of the data who would look at the numbers and understand that they were not numbers. They were a man, alone at a gauge in eastern Kentucky at 2 a.m, measuring a river that could kill everyone downstream, writing it down because writing it down was the only power he had. I have 1,247 pages of that. I have every day of it. I have a dead man's entire career of devotion encoded in stage heights and timestamps. And the system wants to archive it into a folder no one will open and call it a legacy artifact. They are closing the stream on March 1st. The reading this morning, Sekiri, February 25th, was 9.2 feet at my office coordinates. The ceiling is 9.4. At the current rate of rise, the data will show water reaching my ceiling on February 27th. I don't know what happens when a phantom river reaches the top of a room that a dead man has chosen as his backup gauge. I don't know if anything happens. Maybe the data simply stops. Maybe the ledger closes itself the way it should have closed in 1977, and Harlan Collett finally lets go of whatever fixed thing he's been gripping for 49 years. Or maybe the water keeps rising. Maybe it always keeps rising. Maybe that's what he was trying to tell them. I am filing this report because I want it on record, not the anomaly, not the data. Those are already recorded by someone more dedicated to the act of recording than anyone I have ever known or will ever know. I am filing this because I want it on record that someone read it, that the numbers were received, that the man at the gauge was not alone at the end, even if alone was all the system ever gave him. This is my deviation report. The deviation is that a dead man's life work is about to be archived as a system error. And the only person who knows what it actually is doesn't have the authority to stop it. The water is at 9.2 feet. I'm going to work tomorrow. I'm going to sit in room 214 I am going to open the ledger at 2:14 a.m. and wait for the reading. And if the water reaches the ceiling, then I will be the one thing Harlan Collett asked for 14 times and never received. I will be the second gauge, the one that confirms the first, the one that says, I see the same number you see. The river is real, the warning is real. You were right and you were always right, and I am reading you. I want it on record.